All right, intermediate algebra, here are your notes for absolute value. So we're going to go back over these. I know we went over these, but it was a while ago. So we're going to talk about what absolute value really means, go over some problems, how to solve them, and go from there. So absolute value actually means the distance from 0, okay? So whenever you see an absolute value, we're talking about how far it is from 0. So we're going to do a few base problems and then we'll go from there. So if you look at this right here, so if I were to put in, let's go with the number 5. So I know that 5 is 5 spaces from 0. So that means the absolute value of 5 is just 5. Okay? Now if I look at it a little differently, if I look at, let's say, negative 5, so if I were to go from 0 to negative 5, I'm still moving 5 spaces. That's just that I'm going in a different direction. So the absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5. All right? Now here's where it gets a little trickier, is if I have a negative out front and then a 5 in there. So what that's actually saying is the opposite of the absolute value of 5. So 5 is 5 spaces away from 0, and the opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. All right? And if I were to do this, if I have negative, the absolute value of negative 5, it's the same process. Negative 5 is still 5 spaces away from 0, and I'm going to take the opposite of that, which is also negative 5. All right? And then the last example is one that trips people up, is the absolute value of 0. And if you think about it, 0 on a number line is only 0 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of 0 is 0. All right. So what we're going to do next is go through these other examples. And this first example is 10 minus 14, and that's all in an absolute value. So always with these, you simplify whatever's inside the absolute value first, and then you worry about anything that might be outside. This first example, we have nothing outside, so we're just going to simplify the inside. So if I take 10 minus 14, I'm going to get the absolute value of negative 4. All right, and then I ask myself, whenever I get there and I see a single number inside there, I ask myself, how far is that number from 0? So if I think about negative 4 is still 4 spaces away from 0. So my answer to that is positive 4. All right. Now I'm going to move on to example number 2. And order of operations still applies, by the way, because when you're inside an absolute value, you do what's inside the absolute value first, but you got to follow order of operations. So if I look at this, I still have an absolute value, okay? And then since this right here is inside parentheses, if I do parentheses negative 2 squared, I get a positive 4. And that's because that's the same as negative 2 times negative 2. So I'm going to get a positive 4. All right. And now this one right here, I'm going to do 5 squared, but then I'm going to take the opposite. So 5 squared, which is 5 times 5, is positive 25. But the opposite of positive 25 is negative 25. And if you're really stuck on how to do that, plug those numbers into your calculator, and the calculator will give you the right answer. So I'm going to continue on with my order of operations. So I have subtraction left, so I'm going to subtract those two things. And I'm going to get negative 21 because 4 minus 25 is negative 21. And then I ask myself, how far is negative 21 from 0? And it happens to be 21 spaces away. So that is my answer. All right, next. We have 2 more examples. This one's more complicated. If you remember up here, I told you to do whatever's inside the absolute value first and worry about this stuff outside later. So right now, we've got this negative 2 and a negative outside the absolute value. I'm not going to do anything with that right now. I'm just going to leave those as they are and simplify what's inside. So if I look, order of operations say I need to take care of my parentheses first. So I have 4 minus 3, which is 1 squared plus 4, absolute value. So I keep going, right? So now I got to take care of my exponents next inside my absolute value, and I'll make those nice and large because they kind of look like ones. So I have negative 2 minus the absolute value, and 1 squared is 1, plus 4 absolute value. So notice I haven't touched this negative 2 and this negative. I haven't done anything with them, and I'm going to leave them all the way to the end. So I have negative 2 minus the absolute value of 5, because 1 plus 4 is 5. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the absolute value of this 5, and then this says do the opposite of it. So the absolute value of 5 is 5, and the opposite of that is negative 5. So I have negative 2 minus 5, and if I do that math, my answer is negative 7. All right. Last example. And again, we follow order of operations. Make sure you do them in the correct order, because otherwise you're going to get a wrong answer if you don't do them in the right order. So I have my absolute value sign right here, and I have a negative 4 squared, which I'm not going to do anything with that yet because parentheses comes before exponent. So I have parentheses in here. So and then I have minus 3, and then I'm going to simplify my parentheses. Okay? So I'm going to do 2 plus 4, which happens to be 6. Because I need to do this before I do anything else. And then order of operations tells me next, because this right here is multiplication, I need to do my exponents next. So I'm going to have the absolute value of the opposite of 4 squared, which is negative 16, okay, minus 3 times 6, all inside the absolute value. All right, so if I keep going with the order of operations, I'm going to do multiplication next. So I'm going to do negative 16 minus 18 inside the absolute value, because negative 3 times positive 6 is negative 18. Now I'm going to combine those because subtraction's last, and I'm going to get the absolute value of negative 24 or 34, if I could add, not like I'm a math teacher or anything. Negative 34, and then the absolute negative 34 is 34 spaces away from 0, and that is my answer. All right, so you're going to be working on an assignment related to these problems, and let me know if you have any questions.